All right, we're going to take this outside today. It's kind of a beautiful low 80s here in Phoenix today. I think we're all kind of, with cabin fever, it's good to be outside. It's good to feel the cool breeze. And I think we're all kind of hoping that the warmer weather calms this whole virus thing down, that maybe like it'll have a seasonal kind of thing. But the question we've been dealing with is how do we walk through a crisis like this in by faith? How do we navigate this in a way that exhibits the fact that we are followers of Jesus, that demonstrates to the people around us uh, that we have a different perspective on life or different perspective on these kinds of events, and really that that shows that we are trusting God in the midst of these kinds of things. And it doesn't just have to be the coronavirus kind of thing. It could be any of the crisis times of our lives, anything that is really difficult in our lives. Because, like I've said, I think it's then that the faith rubber meets the road. That's when faith becomes faith. When I have to walk through something where I can't see the purpose for it, or I can't completely understand why I have to go through this kind of thing, and yet still able to say that even though I don't get it, even though I don't understand it, it doesn't mean that God doesn't have a reason for it, and that is still God is still trustworthy in this time. And so I want to learn how to do that, and I want to talk through some of those things as we do this together. And I said the other day that if we're going to do this, we're going to do it with community. We need each other to do this. I can't do this without you. I need you in my life. I need you speaking truth over me. I need you coming alongside of me to encourage me. I need that in you. And I said then that I wanted to make this very practical, but there are some theological truths that we need to ground ourselves in, and to understand that our our lives are lived out of the truth of who God is and who He's made us to be. And so that's where I think we need to start. And I was thinking, Ann and I were out hiking yesterday, trying before we get shelter in place, which almost is assuredly coming at some point. That we wanted to get out to one of our trails, and went out to the Salt River to walk along the river. Saw the wild horses out there. Our pictures are on Facebook if you want to look at those. Um, but as we were walking along and we were talking about this concept and this idea about how we trust God in this, how we experience the peace of God in the midst of circumstances that are very troubling, unsettling kinds of circumstances. How does peace come into play in that? And the passage that I thought of, and this is kind of where I want to start, is Philippians chapter 4, where I think it's verse 4, where Paul starts by saying, "Rejoice in the Lord. Again, I'll say it, rejoice. Let your gentleness be observable by everyone. The Lord is near." And then goes on to say the whole thing about, in everything by prayer and supplication, let your requests with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace that passes all understanding will guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And so we go to the end of that and we like, well, there's what we want. That's the goal. How do we live in peace in the midst of difficult times? Well, then let's go back to the beginning of this, where Paul says this. He says, rejoice in the Lord. And it must be so important that he says, I'll say it again. Rejoice in the Lord. And so I was walking along chewing on this, and it was like, so what does he mean by that? What does it mean for us to rejoice in the Lord? And as I thought through this, I thought, well, first of all, what that means is that if this came naturally to me, if this was something that I naturally did as just a normal response, he wouldn't have to tell me to do it, right? I mean, it would just be part of my character. But the fact that he has to remind me to do this, that he has to exhort me to rejoice in the Lord, and I'll say it again, rejoice. It's this important. It is so important that you understand this. Rejoice. that it isn't something that comes naturally to me. It is something that I need to think about, something that I need to intentionally put into action in my life. And so, to me, that's an important part in this. I am making an effort in this. I am pausing. I'm trying to. Here's all this stuff that's going on around me, and what I want to do, and it's so troubling. It's that it can be overwhelming, but somehow, some way, somewhere, I need to be able to set that aside and choose to, instead of focusing on those things, to rejoice in the Lord. So how do we go about doing that? What is it that we build into our lives in order to see that happen? Taking a hike out by the river is one of those ways for me. We get away, that physical separation from the things that we're dealing with, is a healthy thing. It helps me to pare away the time. So I've taken the time and I've put myself in a place where are thin places for me. You understand that, places where it's very there's not there's not much between me and God when I'm walking out on a trail like that. And I'm in nature, and there's these wild horses out there, and we saw a bald eagle out there, and those are the kinds of things that just make me say, wow, this is where God is. This is where I need to connect with him. And so I do those kinds of things. I build those things into my life so I can intentionally begin the process of rejoicing in God. So what's the second? The second thing I think is this: that at least part of rejoicing is this is kind of an intellectual part of this, that I need to consider who it is that God is. I need to think about him. I need to put my focus on his character, my focus on the greatness of God, the power of God, the awesomeness of God, the uh, just all of those aspects of his character that make him God, that invite me into the knowledge of who he is, that has genuine impact on the way that I live then. Think of when Jesus in the Lord's Prayer, the disciples come and they say, Jesus, teach us to pray. And Jesus says, okay, I'd love to do that. Let's start here. Start by saying, our Father. And when he says that, what I think he's saying is this: take a moment before you do anything else, before you make any requests, before you bring any of the things that are on your heart, before you are, before you're just, rubbing the magic lamp to get from the genie whatever you want. Before you do that, take a moment to think about who God is. Take a moment to rehearse the way that God is taking care of you. What does it mean for God to be Father? He loves us. He cares about us. He is protecting us. He is coming alongside of us. He is near to us. He is kind and compassionate toward us. He calls us his children. So he is our Father. And Jesus is saying, first of all, consider who God is. You've got all these things going on in your life. Consider, first of all, who God is. And then, secondly, is implied, consider who you are in relationship to God. You are a child of God. That's why you can call him Father, right? That's why Paul says we can cry out, Abba, Father, I need you. Dad, please come help me. That's what a relationship that we have with God. What a thing we share with him. So we think about those things, and I think that is first and foremost what Paul means when he says, rejoice in the Lord. This is God that we're talking about. This is the creator that you are in relationship with. This is the God who has called you out of the desperate situation of your life, and he has called you into his family. Remember those things. Don't let those things get lost by being overwhelmed by the circumstances of life. Because even though bad things happen, God is still good. Even though there are troubles in our lives, it doesn't mean that God has ceased to be good and kind in the way that he is. So we need to remember those things. But then there's another whole aspect of this thing too, and I started to think through this as we were walking along. Like, what will rejoice? He doesn't say consider the character of God. Take time to intellectually think through who God is. Even Jesus in the Lord's Prayer, there's much more to it. I always tell my kids what I'm doing when I'm teaching biblical interpretation that we need to do an emotional in exegesis of a passage, and for Jesus to say, call God our Father. There's certainly some emotion wrapped up in this, and I think the same is true here in Philippians 4. Paul doesn't say, just consider who God is, consider the greatness of God, and that'll bring peace to your life. He says, rejoice in the Lord. And when I think about what rejoicing is, there did a study on this several years ago. There were like 8 pages of all the cross references of joy and rejoicing. And I got to tell you, rejoicing is a noisy thing. It's an emotional thing. It's a expression of gladness. It's a shouting. There's singing. There's playing of instruments. You look through the Bible and you do this thing on rejoicing, and there is a verbal excited response to this. And so we're walking along, and I'm thinking about this, and I'm starting to say stuff like this. It seems like rejoicing means that we go, whoo, all right, God, you are great, you are good. And Anne's going, oh, would you please? There are other people on the trail. We don't want to scare the horses away. But I'm just thinking through how unemotional we are about our faith in God, and yet I think that, man, we need to somehow build this into our lives where we are celebrating who God is. Rejoice in Him. Paul says, this is so important. Let me say it again. Rejoice. Be glad. I mean, those are 2 words that almost go hand in hand whenever the word rejoice is made. Rejoice and be glad, for God is God. He's the one who's looking after you. He's the one who has created you. He's the one who is your Father. He's the one who has done these things. He has provided for you in the past. Jesus has gone to prepare a place for you. Rejoice in those things. Death no longer has its victory over us. Death no longer has a sting. We are victors in that. Nothing can separate. These are things to rejoice over. Yeah, I'm getting a little emotional about this, I know. But man, we got to find, if you have to go in a closet and do this so nobody catches you doing this kind of thing, do that. But find the place to emotionally express yourself out of gratefulness and mind-blowing, unbelievable kinds of things about who God is and the character that you know Him to have and the way that He is involved in your life, and that you are a child of this God. Then he goes on. We'll talk more about that to come, because he lays out a process of this that I just think is amazing in order to get us to peace. We'll do that next time. God bless you guys. Love you. See you soon.